Now we're going to begin Unit 2 by taking a look at the classical empires. And the first on the list are three empires: Persia, Greece, and the Hellenic empires established by Alexander the Great. The first major empire here is the Persians, which we know as the Achaemenid. There are several Persian empires, so if you can remember Achaemenid, that'll help you. But mainly when we say Persia, just really know we're talking about an empire in Iran. And then this Persian empire, the Achaemenid, will reach from India to Greece, with their capital being at Persepolis. And their major leaders, their first one is Cyrus the Great, and then Darius the Great takes over after him, expands the empire more. And then Xerxes is the last of the great rulers, although we might not view him as great in the Western world because of the Greco-Persian Wars, which he'll lose to the Greeks on, where we have the famous Battle of Thermopylae. But he's like the last great one. And then the leaders after him start falling in skill and ability, and will eventually lose to Alexander the Great when they're conquered, or be conquered by Alexander the Great. The huge thing with this empire is it will be the basis for any other major empire in the Western world and in the Middle East, in that if you want to be a successful empire, you have to be tolerant of the people you conquer. And the Persians are great at practicing this. They do this by organizing the territory into satrapies, which you can think of like states in the U.S., and then they have a satrap run that government of that large area. And so what we have here is a governor that controls everything, but only at that level. And so they'll take taxes that they need, and they'll create public works to unite the whole area. Things like roads, which will eventually lead to a royal road connecting the whole or the majority of the empire, and qanats, which are underground irrigation systems. But they let everyone else do what they want to do. So they allow the local governments, cities, and everything else to run themselves as they would have otherwise and follow their religion, because the Persians aren't all about spreading the religion of Zoroastrianism. And so they let them do their own thing, and this works really well until we get to Alexander the Great, and he comes in and wipes them out on his conquest of many different regions of the world. So this is what the empire looks like. You can see pretty large. It's actually one of the largest empires, or was the largest empire of the day, and had a great percentage of the world's population in it at the time. So they expand to this whole territory. You can see all the way to the Indus Valley in the east, and all the way to Greece in the west, with some of those major battles being marked by those stars that we see happening throughout their history. Now, the next one on our step is, or next one on our list is classical Greece, which gets kind of dated back sometimes to 750 BCE, but really it's probably more like 550 that we actually get like the real Greece that we would think of for classical Greece. And that Greece is, we have a collection of city-states known as polis, or each city-state is known as a polis, and they're all independent of each other. Athens and Sparta and Thebes are all divided in what they're doing and what they want. They are united in the idea that they share a common culture, and that they all speak Greek and believe in the Greek gods, and have some of the same values. But for the most part, they are fiercely independent and don't want to be united at all. They all have different types of governments. We have monarchies, oligarchies, democracies. Like in Athens, you'll see a democracy. In Sparta, we'll see an oligarchy, but also kind of a monarchy where we have two kings. And you have some crazy governments at this time that are different from what we see today as a common government, but they will lay the basis for a lot of the governments that we see in Western culture. Whoops. And so there are only a couple times when they'll become united, and that is during the Greco-Persian Wars, when the Persians come in and attack because they don't want to be conquered and controlled by anyone else, and by Alexander the Great when he forces them to unite under his conquests. And so the major wars that kind of Greece is involved in here at the time are the Greco-Persian Wars, where they fend off the Persians, and we have the famous Battle of Thermopylae there, and you can see in pop culture we see this in the Battle of 300, that movie. And then we have the Peloponnesian War, which is between the Greek city-states, mainly Sparta and Athens, to gain all of Greece under their influence. This will eventually lead to Sparta winning after several wars and years of fighting. But at the same time, Sparta will eventually lose because they'll be conquered by Thebes because they're exhausted from all the fighting. And Athens will, and all the other Greek city-states will fall then to Alexander the Great because they cannot unite and they're not strong enough to fight against Alexander the Great. So, with them divided, that leads to the Hellenic Empires, which are started by Philip II of Macedon. He starts conquering territories and eventually conquers Greece, and then Alexander the Great reconquers them, and then goes off and conquers Persia, and then Egypt, and gets to parts of India. We don't know how far he really gets into India, but he turns back from India because his soldiers are like, we're too far from home and we don't want to fight anymore. And if you can't get your soldiers to fight anymore, then you have problems in leading a military. So he comes back. Will eventually die in his early 30s because he gets drunk and liked to drink a lot. Burned down the city of Persepolis in a drunken stupor, which he regretted afterwards. Persepolis, again, is that capital of the Persian Empire. And so he'll die around in his early 30s, and this huge territory that he conquered will become three different empires. You have the Seleucids, which will be in kind of modern-day Turkey, and they kind of are the new Persian Empire, I guess you could say. Well, I guess not really, but they kind of take over some of that that Persia had. You have the Ptolemaic dynasty, which begins in Egypt, and we'll get a famous pharaoh named Cleopatra out of them. And then Macedon has its own empire based on kind of controlling Greece. But that bit that was controlling India kind of disappears from their empire. And these three empires will eventually kind of fight each other, but will also resist being conquered by anyone else until the Romans come around and force them into their empire. Now, the big thing that the Hellenic empires do is, while they're in control of their territory, is they spread Greek culture. And we're going to talk about Greek culture a lot more in a couple weeks. But the Greeks that conquered the territory married locals and spread that Greek culture, and they set up Greek cities like Alexander the Great sets up every city. Many of the cities are called Alexandria after himself, because what better thing than to name cities after yourself? Greek becomes the main language in the Eastern Mediterranean world, and this will eventually lay the groundworks for the Silk Road because of these connections between these empires and groups of people. And so here's Alexander the Great's conquest and his all the territory he conquered, and what will eventually become those three empires, and the Macedonians, the Seleucids, and the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt.